April 18th, 1943, 6:14 a.m. Bougainville Island, Solomon Islands. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto adjusts his white dress uniform in the cabin of the Mitsubishi G4M Betty bomber. He is punctual to the minute. His staff had begged him to cancel this inspection tour. The front lines are too dangerous, they said, but he is the architect of Pearl Harbor, the commander of the combined fleet. His men need to see him. The twin Mitsubishi Kase engines roar. The bomber lifts off from Rabaul's Simpson Harbor runway and banks south, escorted by 6 A6M0 fighters. Yamamoto checks his watch. The flight to Balale Island will take 1 hour and 35 minutes. He expects to land at precisely 7:45 a.m., 700 miles to the southeast. 18 American P-38 Lightning fighters are already airborne. They know exactly where he will be. The story of what the Japanese said when they discovered Americans had broken their naval codes is not a story of a single revelation. It is a story of denial, disbelief, and devastating consequences. It reveals a truth that intelligence professionals still study today, that the greatest cryptographic advantage in military history was preserved not by American secrecy alone, but by Japanese overconfidence in systems they believed unbreakable. And it begins not with Yamamoto's death, but with a disaster 11 months earlier, a defeat so total that it should have told Tokyo everything they needed to know. June 4th, 1942, 5:20 a.m., 200 miles northwest of Midway Atoll. Vice Admiral Chuichi Nagumo stands on the bridge of the aircraft carrier Akagi. The morning air is cool. 4 of Japan's finest carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, steam in formation. 261 aircraft sit ready on their flight decks and in their hangars. Nagumo commands the most powerful striking force in the Pacific. He is about to spring a trap. He does not know he is walking into one. 600 miles to the east at Pearl Harbor, a windowless basement room holds the secret that will destroy him. Station Hypo, the Navy's combat intelligence unit, has been working around the clock for months. Lieutenant Commander Joseph Rochefort and his team of cryptanalysts have penetrated JN-25B, the operational code of the Imperial Japanese Navy. They cannot read every message, but they can read enough. They know Midway is the target. They know the date, they know the approach vectors, and most critically, they know that Nagumo believes his fleet is undetected. Admiral Chester Nimitz has positioned 3 American carriers, Enterprise, Hornet, and Yorktown, northeast of Midway. They are waiting. Nagumo's first strike launches at 4:30 a.m., 108 aircraft bound for Midway's airfield. At 7 a.m. as his planes return and his crews begin the laborious process of rearming for a second strike, American dive bombers find him. The attack comes from multiple directions. Lieutenant Commander Wade McCluskey's SBD Dauntless dive bombers from Enterprise and Yorktown plunge through scattered clouds. In 6 minutes, 3 Japanese carriers are mortally wounded. Akagi takes 2 bomb hits. Aviation fuel ignites. Ammunition begins to cook off. Within hours, Nagumo's flagship is abandoned. Kaga absorbs 4 bombs and becomes an inferno. Soryu takes 3 hits and loses all power. By sunset, Hiryu, the last carrier, joins her sisters at the bottom of the Pacific, 4 fleet carriers, 292 aircraft, over 3,000 men, gone. In Tokyo, the Naval General Staff receives the first fragmentary reports. The mood shifts from confidence to confusion to horror. How did this happen? How did the Americans know? Rear Admiral Matome Ugaki, Yamamoto's chief of staff, writes in his diary that night. His words reveal the cognitive dissonance that will plague Japanese intelligence for the rest of the war. He notes the suspicious timing of the American ambush, the uncanny positioning of their carriers. But he cannot accept the obvious explanation. The Americans, he concludes, must have had search aircraft in exactly the right place at exactly the right time. Extraordinary luck, nothing more. This was the first moment when Japan should have known. They chose not to believe. The Imperial Japanese Navy had absolute faith in its cipher systems. JN-25 had been in use since 1939, regularly updated with new codebooks and additive tables. The system used a dictionary of approximately 33,000 five-digit code groups, then super-enciphered each message with random additives from a separate book. In theory, it was unbreakable without possessing both books. What Japan did not know, what they refused to consider, was that their system had vulnerabilities. American, British, and Australian cryptanalysts had been attacking JN-25 since 1940. By early 1942, Station Hypo could read portions of intercepted traffic. Not everything, but enough. The Japanese changed their codebooks on June 1, 1942, just days before Midway. They believed this would blind American intelligence, but Rochefort's team had already extracted the critical information. The change came too late. After Midway, the Japanese conducted internal reviews. They examined their communications procedures, their codebook distribution, their radio discipline, and, remarkably, they concluded their codes were secure. Their reasoning was circular but psychologically powerful. If the Americans had broken JN-25, the war would already be lost. Since the war was not lost, the codes must be intact. The problem, they decided, lay elsewhere. Perhaps a spy at Pei truck, perhaps loose talk by officers on leave, perhaps the Americans had simply guessed correctly. This self-deception would cost them their greatest admiral. Chance, April 13, 1943. Rabaul, New Britain. Yamamoto's headquarters transmits a routine administrative message. It announces the Admiral's upcoming inspection tour of forward bases in the Solomon Islands, part of Operation Go, his air offensive against Allied positions. The message includes specific details: departure time from Rabaul, arrival time at Balal, the number of aircraft in his party, even the type of planes. The message is encrypted in JN-25D, the current version of the Naval Operational Code. Within hours, American listening stations intercept the transmission. The ciphertext travels through secure channels to Station Hypo at Pearl Harbor and the Fleet Radio Unit at Melbourne. Cryptanalysts begin work immediately. By April 14th, they have a complete decrypt. Fleet Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, Commander-in-Chief of the Combined Fleet, will depart Rabaul at 6 a.m. on April 18th. He will fly in a medium attack plane escorted by 6 fighters. He will arrive at Balal Island at 7:45 a.m. The message is a pas d'arrêt, death warrant, written by Japan's own hand. The decrypt reaches Admiral Nimitz within hours. The implications are staggering. Yamamoto is the most important military figure in Japan. The man who planned Pearl Harbor, the strategic mind behind every major Japanese naval operation. He is beloved by the Japanese people and feared by his enemies. And for approximately 30 minutes on the morning of April 18th, he will be within range of American fighters operating from Guadalcanal. The decision rises quickly through the chain of command. Nimitz consults with Admiral William Halsey. Halsey's response is immediate: get Yamamoto. But Secretary of the Navy, Frank Knox, must approve. So must President Franklin Roosevelt himself. The legal and ethical questions are complex. This would be a targeted assassination of a foreign military commander, unprecedented in American warfare. Roosevelt gives his authorization. The mission is codenamed Operation Vengeance. Be April 18, 1943, 6:34 a.m., Henderson Field, Guadalcanal. 18 P-38G Lightnings of the 339th Fighter Squadron taxi into position. The pilots have been briefed on the target, but not his identity. They know only that they are intercepting a high-value Japanese officer. Major John Mitchell commands the mission. He has calculated the intercept geometry with extraordinary precision, a 435-mile flight at wavetop altitude to avoid radar detection, requiring split-second timing to arrive at the exact moment Yamamoto's flight approaches Bougainville. 4 P-38s are designated the killer flight. Their job is to shoot down the bombers. The remaining 14 will fly top cover against the Zero escorts. The Lightnings lift off and turn northwest, flying just 50 feet above the Pacific. 900 miles north, Yamamoto's Betty bomber drones through clear morning skies at 6,500 feet. He sits in the passenger cabin, reviewing documents. 6 Zeros weave protectively around the two bombers. Yamamoto in the lead aircraft, his staff chief Vice Admiral Ugaki in the second. At 7:34 a.m., the coastline of Bougainville appears on the horizon. At 7:35 a.m., First Lieutenant Douglas Canning spots the Japanese formation. Bogies, 11 o'clock high. The intercept is perfect. The P-38s punch their external fuel tanks and climb. The Zeros see them coming and dive to engage. In seconds, the orderly formation dissolves into a swirling dogfight above the jungle canopy. First, Lieutenant Rex Barber, flying one of the killer Flight P-38s, ignores the fighters. His target is the lead bomber. He closes from behind and below. A classic attack angle. At a range of approximately 100 yards, he opens fire with 450 caliber machine guns and a 20mm cannon. The rounds tear through the Betty's right engine and wing. Fuel streams from ruptured tanks. The bomber begins to trail smoke. Barber fires again. The Betty's right wing erupts in flames. The aircraft noses down, descending toward the jungle at a steep angle. There is no time to bail out. The bomber carrying Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto crashes into the jungle near Aku village at approximately 7:45 a.m., exactly the time his itinerary said he would land at Balale. He dies, still strapped in his seat, his white-gloved hand resting on his samurai sword. The second Betty, carrying Vice Admiral Ugaki, is also hit. The pilot attempts a water landing off the coast of Bougainville. The aircraft breaks apart on impact. Ugaki survives, injured but alive, one of only 3 survivors from the 2 bombers. The Zeros fight fiercely, but the P-38s disengage after completing their mission. First, Lieutenant Raymond Hine is shot down and killed, the only American loss. The remaining 17 Lightnings return to Guadalcanal. Major Mitchell lands at 2:40 p.m. Debriefing begins immediately. The pilots report 2 bombers destroyed, 1 probable 0 kill. They still do not know they have just changed the course of the Pacific War. Tokyo receives the first reports within hours. Search parties locate the crash site the following day. The news is confirmed. Admiral Yamamoto is dead. The Japanese government does not announce the loss for over a month. When the official statement finally comes, on May 21st, it claims only that Yamamoto encountered the enemy and met a gallant death. No mention of ambush, no acknowledgement that the Yetsi Americans knew exactly where to find him, but privately, questions are being asked. Vice Admiral Ugaki, recovering from his injuries, pores over the details. The timing was too precise, the intercept point too perfect. The Americans had flown over 400 miles across open ocean, a navigational feat that required knowing not just where to look, but when. How could they have known? Ugaki's diary entries from this period reveal a mind wrestling with an unthinkable possibility. He considers the idea that American codebreakers had read the itinerary message. He examines the radio procedures used by Yamamoto's headquarters. He notes that the transmission had been made in the clear, no, in code. The message was encrypted. But if the code was broken, the implications are paralyzing. If JN-25 is compromised, then every operational message sent by the combined fleet has been readable. Every battle plan, every ship movement, every order. Midway was not bad luck. Midway was a trap. Ugaki pulls back from the precipice. He cannot accept it. Instead, he concludes that a spy must have transmitted the information from Rabaul. Perhaps a coast watcher. Perhaps a local collaborator. The codes, he insists, remain secure. This self-deception continues even as more evidence mounts. The American military was acutely aware of the danger. If Japan realized their codes were broken, they would change everything. The intelligence advantage, painstakingly built over years of cryptanalytic work, would evaporate overnight. Strict protocols governed the use of signals intelligence. Information from decrypts could only be acted upon if there was a plausible alternative explanation for how the Allies obtained it. Cover stories were prepared in advance. Reconnaissance flights were dispatched to discover Japanese positions that cryptanalysts had already located. For Operation Vengeance, The cover story was simple. A coast watcher had reported Yamamoto's flight by radio. The Japanese, it was hoped, would blame a security failure on the ground, rather than question their cipher systems. The deception worked, perhaps too well. Japanese intelligence conducted multiple investigations into Yamamoto's death throughout 1943. Each time, they reached the same conclusion. A local security breach had revealed the itinerary. The Allies had spy networks throughout the Solomon Islands. A radio message from a coast watcher was the most logical explanation. The alternative, that America could read Japanese naval communications, remained unthinkable. There were dissenting voices. Some communications officers expressed concern about the vulnerability of JN-25. They noted patterns that suggested the Americans anticipated Japanese operations with suspicious accuracy. They recommended more frequent codebook changes, stricter radio discipline, investigation of cipher security. These warnings were dismissed or ignored. The Naval General Staff had confidence in their systems. Changing the codes was logistically complex and operationally disruptive. Without definitive proof of compromise, no action was taken. The truth would not fully emerge until after the war ended. In September 1945, as American occupation forces landed in Japan, intelligence officers began systematically debriefing Japanese military and naval staff. Among the questions they asked, "Did you know your codes were broken?" The answers were consistent and devastating. No, they did not know. Japanese officers expressed shock when shown examples of decrypted messages. They had believed, truly believed, that their cipher systems were mathematically unbreakable. The possibility of cryptanalytic penetration had been discussed in theoretical terms, but dismissed as impractical. One senior naval officer reportedly said that learning of the codebreaking felt like discovering we had been fighting blind while the enemy could see everything we did. Another described the revelation as understanding, finally, why the war had unfolded as it did. The American presence at Midway. The ambush of Yamamoto. The systematic destruction of Japanese shipping by submarines that always seemed to know exactly where to wait. Every move had been watched. For years. The reaction among Japanese intelligence professionals was a mixture of professional admiration and profound shame. The Americans had accomplished what Japan's own experts had declared impossible. Worse, they had done so without Japan ever realizing it. Some officers expressed anger that warnings had been ignored. The signs had been there, they said. The suspiciously accurate American positioning at Midway, the perfect timing of the Yamamoto intercept, the steady attrition of the submarine and merchant fleets. Any one of these could have been coincidence. Together, they formed a pattern that should have been undeniable. But cognitive bias proved stronger than evidence. The Imperial Japanese Navy had invested too much institutional pride in its communication security. Admitting failure would have meant admitting that the defeats of 1942 and 43 were not merely military setbacks, but catastrophic intelligence failures. It was easier to believe in bad luck and Allied spies than to accept that the foundation of their command and control had been compromised from the beginning. The legacy of this intelligence failure extends far beyond World War II. Cryptologists and intelligence analysts study the Japanese experience as a cautionary tale. It demonstrates that even sophisticated cipher systems are vulnerable, not just to mathematical attack, but to the human assumption that they cannot be broken. Overconfidence kills. The story also illustrates the extraordinary discipline required to protect signals. Intelligence. The Americans maintained operational security for years, carefully limiting how decrypted information was used, constructing cover stories to explain away their foreknowledge. One careless slip could have undone everything. There was, in fact, a near disaster. In June 1942, a reporter for the Chicago Tribune published details about Midway that strongly implied the U.S. had broken Japanese codes. The article could have triggered exactly the code change that American cryptanalysts feared. It didn't. Japanese intelligence officers apparently never saw the article, or if they did, they didn't believe it. The death of Admiral Yamamoto remains one of the most dramatic episodes in the history of signals intelligence. It was not an accident. It was not a chance encounter. It was a precision-targeted assassination made possible by cryptanalysis, an enemy commander killed by his own encrypted words. When Vice Admiral Ugaki finally learned the truth after the war, he had been dead for 3 years. On August 15, 1945, the day of Japan's surrender, Ugaki led a final kamikaze attack against American ships at Okinawa. He never returned. He went to his death still believing that Yamamoto had been betrayed by a spy. The windowless basement at Pearl Harbor, the radio intercept stations at Melbourne and Dutch Harbor, the exhausted cryptanalysts working around the clock on fragments of code, these were the invisible architects of Allied victory in the Pacific. They gave Nimitz the knowledge to win at Midway. They gave Roosevelt the opportunity to kill Yamamoto, and they did so while the enemy remained blind to the truth. The Japanese asked themselves again and again, how did the Americans know? How were they always in the right place at the right time? The answer was there, hidden in every encrypted message they sent. The answer was that nothing they said was secret, and by the time they understood, it was far too late.